Well, welcome to this latest midweek musing and to the fourth reason why I think Christianity is so compelling. And for this one, I just want to talk about Jesus. You know, Christianity isn't just a moral code to live life by. It's not an ideology for us to follow. It's all about a person, Jesus of Nazareth, who of course lived a few thousand years ago. You know, the number one question we have to answer about Christianity is simply, who was he? You know, who was this Jesus? You know, he's often portrayed, isn't he, as a long-haired, blue-eyed figure carrying a lamb, all meek and mild and gentle. But you know, if you actually look at his life, you look at the things he did, the things he said, he certainly was no wimp. You know, he cleared out the temple using a whip. He was really sharp with those who were self-righteous. Yet he was so kind and merciful to those people who were outcasts in that society. He was so loving and forgiving to those people who knew their messed up life. You know, he hated sin, yet it was those caught up in the messiest of sin who were the most drawn to him. You know, he didn't care in a good way what people thought about him. He didn't cozy up to leaders or people with status. He deliberately said things that caused people not to follow him. And if you really look at what he did and what he said, he is the most compelling of people. Absolutely fascinating. He didn't pursue fame or wealth. He never travelled for more than a few hundred miles from where he was born. He only ministered for 3 years or so. He had no formal education, yet like no other figure in human history, he has affected the world. You know, it's common to say something like, I believe that Jesus was just a good moral teacher, but no more than that. You know, if that's true, then we may as well shut down all these ancient church buildings. It really wouldn't be worth it if Jesus was simply just a good moral teacher. And actually, whilst his moral teaching can't be surpassed, you know, most other religions have something similar in terms of their moral teaching. It isn't moral teaching that distinguishes Jesus. Most of what is written about him is written about his death and his supposed resurrection. That's what he's remembered for the most. And Jesus, you know, didn't leave it open for us to conclude that he was just a moral teacher, a good moral teacher. So, for example, you know, one of the things he said was that he forgave people their sins. Just think how ridiculous that sounds. Suppose, you know, I was walking down Wollaston High Street and I came across two people fighting, and I went over and to the perpetrator I said, "I forgive you your sin here." Well, the person who has been offended against would look at me and say, "Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Who are you to forgive that person their sin? It's me who's been offended against." So it doesn't make sense for Jesus to say he forgives people their sins unless he was the Son of God, and actually it's his law that is chiefly being broken. C.S. Lewis spoke eloquently about all this. He said there's only really 3 options for us when we consider this Jesus. Either he was a madman, claiming to be divine, forgiving people's sins, but you know, he was deluded in that. Or else he was an evil imposter. You know, he was going around deliberately tricking people. Or he was who he claimed to be. There's really no other option. C.S. Lewis concludes, he says, "Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic or a fiend, And consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. God has landed on this enemy-occupied world in human form. This Jesus of Nazareth is the most compelling, fascinating of people to follow. Amen.